nderuar zonja Solovova, nderuar zoti Plekanov, nderuar të ftuar, kolegë, miq. Është një kënaqësi t'ju mirëpresim në raportin e tranzicionit të Bankës Evropiane për Rindërtim dhe Zhvillim, i cili kësaj radhe fokusohet në një nga forcat më të fuqishme, por ende të nënvlerësuara, që formësojnë në ditët e sotme ekonomitë dhe shoqëritë tona, të cilat janë ndryshimet demografike. Demografia mund të ngjajë si koncept abstrakt, por është forca fondamentale e zhvillimit dhe e prosperitetit të një shoqërie. Demografia evoluon ngadalë, përgjatë ciklet shumë të gjatë në kohë, sesa ciklet e biznesit apo ciklet financiare. Kjo është pikërisht arsyeja sepse demografia nuk është gjithnjë në qendër të politikës apo debateve tona të bankingut qendror. Megjithatë, aktualisht po jetojmë një pikë these demografike globale, e cila kërkon edhe vëmendjen tonë si bankë qendrore. Ndërsa gjithnjë më pak njerëz hynë në tregun e punës, gjithnjë më shumë të tjerë janë të ndërvarur nga sistemet e pensioneve dhe të kujdesit shëndetësor. Tashmë të ndryshime po ushtrojnë presion mbi produktivitetin, mbi financat publike, mbi përparësitë politike dhe mbi perspektivat e fatgjata të rritjes në rajone të ndryshme. Në Bankën e Shqipërisë si kemi analizuar këto çështje dhe zhvillimet demografike prej pothuajse një dekade. Plakja e popullsisë dhe emigracioni janë identifikuar herët në kohë si sfida përcaktuese për të ardhmen ekonomike të Shqipërisë. Vendi ynë pasqyron shumë nga tendencat e përshkruara në këtë raport të radhës. Plakjen e shpejtë të popullsisë, të kombinuar me largim të konsiderueshëm të rive dhe të popullsisë në moshë pune. Sipas parashikimeve të Kombeve të Bashkuara, këto dinamika pritet të vazhdojnë dhe të intensifikohen edhe në vitet në vijim, duke çuar në përmbysjen e piramidës demografike. Transformimi i shpejtë demografik por i formëson ekonominë dhe shoqërinë shqiptare, ndërsa këto të fundit tashmë përballen me sfida të ngjashme me ato të theksuara në raportin e tranzicionit të Bankës Evropiane për Rindërtim dhe Zhvillim. Popullsia ka ardhur në rënje të vazhdueshme, ndërkohë që mosha mesatare po rritet me shpejtësi. Regjistrimi i popullsisë i vitit 2023 evidenton rreth 2.4 milion banor, afërsisht 1/3 më pak krahasuar me vitin 1990. Ndërkohë mosha mesatare ka arritur pothuajse në 43 vjeç. Emigracioni, dikur i konsideruar si faktor lehtësues për papunësinë dhe për varfërinë, po shfaqet gjithnjë më shumë si një sfidë strukturore. Rritja ekonomike e qëndrueshme, nivelet historikisht të ulta të papunësisë dhe mungesat e fuqisë punëtore në sektorët kyç i kanë bërë më të dukshme pasojat afatgjata të ndryshimeve demografike, si për bizneset, ashtu edhe për familjet. Plakja e popullsisë ndikon si në kërkesën, ashtu edhe në ofertën agregate. Ajo ndryshon modelet e konsumit, dobëson inovacionin dhe produktivitetin, rrit kostot e prodhimit dhe në fund ndikon në çmimet, investimet dhe kapacitetin prodhues, duke përbërë kërcënim për qëndrueshmërinë afatgjatë të rritjes ekonomike. Raportet dhe analizat e Bankës së Shqipërisë kanë theksuar vazhdimisht efektet negative të këtyre prirjeve mbi tregun e punës, pagat, dinamikat e inflacionit dhe potencialin afatgjatë të rritjes së ekonomisë shqiptare. Megjithatë, ekonomia shqiptare ka treguar përshtatshmëri dhe qëndrueshmëri të lartë në vitet e fundit, e mbështetur nga inflacioni i ulët, rritja e qëndrueshme ekonomike, rritja e punësimit dhe e pagave, si dhe përmirësimi i llogarisë korrente. Kushtet e tregut punës janë përmirësuar ndjeshëm, reflektuar në rritje të punësimit, në rënje të papunësisë në nivele historikisht ulta dhe produktivitetit të punës dukshëm më të lartë krahasuar me periudhat para krizës financiare globale. Deri më sot, tregu është përshtatur dhe ka kompensuar presionet demografike përmes rritjes së normës së pjesëmarrjes në tregun e punës, por kjo është shoqëruar me koston e pagave më të larta dhe rrjedhimisht presione më të mëdha inflacioniste. Banka e Shqipërisë ka luajtur një rol kyç në këto zhvillime përmes zbatimit të një politike monetare të kujdesshme, të qëndrueshme dhe proaktive, e fokusuar në ruajtjen e stabilitetit të çmimeve dhe në mbrojtjen e fuqisë blerëse. Që nga mesi vitit 2024, qëndrimi lehtësues i politikës monetare ka ndihmuar në ankorimin e prirjeve inflacioniste, në uljen e pasigurisë, në përmirësimin e kushteve financiare, duke çuar në ulje të kosteve të huamarrjes dhe në rritje të fortë të kredisë. Në të njëjtën kohë, sektori bankar ka vijuar të forcohet, duke shënuar përmirësim të treguesve të likuiditetit, të kapitalizimit dhe të cilësisë aktiveve, ndërkohë që rreziqet sistemike mbeten të kontrolluara. Ky pozicion i fortë financiar ofron siguri që sistemi bankar të vijojë të mbështesë aktivitetin ekonomik përmes një ndërmjetësimi financiar efektiv. Pavarësisht kësaj arritje, prirjet negative demografike në Shqipëri pritet të jenë të qëndrueshme. Studimet tona tregojnë se këto prirje ka të ngjarë të ushtrojnë presion në rënje mbi normat reale të interesit. Ky mjedis kufizon efektivitetin e politikës monetare konvencionale, pasi normat e ulta të interesit u lënë bankave qendrore më pak hapësirë për stimuluar ekonominë. Në të njëjtën kohë, ndryshimet demografike mund shkaktojnë ndërlikim edhe të dinamikave të inflacionit. Ulumtimet tona tregojnë se rritja e normës së pjesëmarrjes në tregun e punës vjen si pasojë e pagave më të larta. Këto gjetje për Shqipërinë janë në rezonancë të plotë me përfundimet e paraqitura më gjerë në raportin e tranzicionit të Bankës Evropiane për Rindërtim dhe Zhvillim. Në të gjitha vendet në zhvillim të Europës, popullsia në plakje dhe tkurrja e fuqisë punëtore rëndojnë mbi rritjen ekonomike. Megjithatë, përgjigjja e politikave kërkon veprim të koordinuar dhe vullnet politik. Këto reforma kërkojnë guxim dhe ndershmëri. Ato duhet të trajtojnë reformimin e sistemit të pensioneve, modernizimin e tregjeve të punës, hartimin e politikave realiste të migracionit dhe investimin në plakjet të shëndetshme të popullsisë. Të gjitha këto nënkuptojnë përqafimin e teknologjive të reja, përfshirë inteligjencën artificiale në mënyrë të përgjegjshme dhe gjithëpërfshirëse. Mbi të gjitha, brezat e ri duhet të mbeten në qendër të vendimarrjes ekonomike. Lejoni ta përmbyll me mesazhin kryesor të lexuar në raportin e tranzicionit të Bankës Evropiane për Zhvillim të këtij viti, i cili është demografia nuk duhet të jetë një fat i paracaktuar. Raporti ofron një panoramë të saktë të politikave të përshtatshme për të kuptuar ndryshimet demografike dhe ndikimet e tyre ekonomike. Shpresoj që ky raport shërbej jo vetëm si referencë analitike, por dhe si katalizator për të zhvilluar një debat të informuar dhe për të ndërmarrë veprime vendimtare në funksion të ekonomisë dhe të zhvillimit. Ju falenderit gjithë dhe ju uroj një diskutim të frytshëm të gjetjeve të raportit tranzicionit të Bankës Evropiane për Rindërtim dhe Zhvillim. Fjalën ja kaloj zonjën Solovova, si drejtoreshe Bergjit për Shqipërinë. Faleminderit. It's yours.
Thank you, Governor. Mirëmëngjes. Good morning, dear guests, partners, colleagues, and friends. It's my favorite event of the year, so I'm very excited to welcome you here and once again. And I would like to thank the Governor and the Bank of Albania for hosting us, for hosting this event, and for his remarks that provide very good segue to the presentation that will be delivered shortly by my esteemed colleague, Alexander Plekhanov, from the Office of Chief Economist of the EBRD. This year, Transition Reports explores global demographic trends which are reshaping the economies, the policies, and the politics in the countries where EBRD operates. And we explore particular impact on the labor markets, technology, and migration in this report. And I will not dwell any further because Alex is the best place to inform you of this report. But I would like to use this opportunity to update you on general developments at the EBRD and what we have achieved last year. in 2025. In 2025, we have delivered a record annual business investment of 16.8 million euros in 640 projects across all our regions of operations. 75% of that financing went to support private sector development, and 56% of that financing was for the projects that contributed to the green transition. We have maintained steady growth across all of our regions despite global headwinds, and we kept delivering our crucial support to Ukraine, where we remain the largest institutional investor. Last year, we also took historic steps to broaden our geographic reach, opening resident offices in 6 new countries of operations for EBRD. These are Benin, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Kenya, Nigeria, and Iraq. And we already have financed our first projects in these geographies less than a year from starting operations there. But this progress was underpinned by strong shareholder support and confidence in EBRD's mandate, which was reflected in active participation in our ongoing capital increase efforts. And we thank our shareholder countries and intergovernment institutions for their support. 2025 was an exceptionally active year for EBRD in Albania as well. We provided 218 million of financing across 31 projects, which is a record engagement for us here. And of this amount, over 110 was extended for sustainable infrastructure projects in transport and energy. And that includes 30 million loan for the rehabilitation of Rail Corridor 8, Phase 1, Durrës-Rogajina, alongside our co-financing partners, EIB and EU, through the WBIF grant. In the energy sector, we provided 46 million euro financing to OSHA to restructure its balance sheet and support grid modernization and green investments, which are so needed. We also provided 30 million loan to cash to develop 50 megawatt solar PV plant, leveraging 9.2 million euro grant provided by the EU through WBIF. Our support to the private sector competitiveness materialized both through our partner banks and direct financing. We supported private sector through risk-sharing programs with banks, such as portfolio risk-sharing, also supported with the donor financing from the EU, as well as agribusiness, Albanian Agribusiness and Tourism Support Facility that is coming to an end this year and has been very successful. And we had quite a few success stories to tell about that. We also provided funding programs targeting women in business, youth in business, energy efficiency, digitalization, and greening of the small and medium enterprises, which comprise the core economy in Albania. But as usual, we have complemented our financing with policy and technical assistance, delivering 42 advisory projects under our Advice for Small Business program, and assisting the government of Albania in advancing its reform agenda in line with the EU accession priorities. Looking ahead, supporting the green economy, strengthening connectivity, and preparing the private sector for the EU integration will remain our key priorities in the country. We will continue to support and invest in renewable energy and sustainable infrastructure, while deepening partnerships with local financial institutions, expanding targeted SME programs, and supporting private sector sustainable projects directly. There is so much to be done ahead of us, but none of this would be possible without support of all of you. So I would like to thank our partners, our clients and donors and international co-investors for your continuous support and cooperation with EBRD in Albania. Thank you very much, and then please enjoy the presentation by Alex. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me say that it's a great pleasure to be back in Tirana. It's been a few times for me over the years, and with every trip in discrete time, you see change. It's maybe the change is not always as fast as we would like it to be, but it's always in the right direction, and it's really nice to see. And It's also great introductory remarks by the governor. They really go to the core of the report and what we are trying to say. It's not per se that people are worried about the demographics or demographic trends, but demographic trends have very strong impact on things that we are accustomed to. And let me probably first start by saying that it's a great achievement of human development, that we are healthier, we're able to live longer, and that also with the current progress and technological progress, there is so much to learn that people naturally invest in quality of children over quantity of children, and that's actually economic paper that was first written in 1960s. And the one thing that probably changed since 1960 is the way people think about demographic transition. Is back then there was a feeling that countries will get rich, they will get developed, and once they get rich, the demographic changes fundamentally. There are fewer children, more older people, older workers, and so on. But actually, we have seen over time that this is only partly true. And as technology advances and humanity develops, actually, with some exceptions in sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East, societies started aging quite fast everywhere. And interestingly, the Balkans is an interesting place. It looks like people age fast and gracefully. When we looked at our countries where the EBRD invests, and we looked at what is the country with the oldest worker, what is the country with the oldest average person, and what is the country with the oldest average voter. They're actually all different countries, because somewhere people are old but they don't like working, and in some places people are old, they work but they don't vote so much in all the years. But the three countries that top these three lists are Bulgaria, Greece, and Croatia. They are all around in different parts of the Balkans. And basically, maybe there is something here in the environment and the food and the Adriatic and Aegean and whatever. It's very hard to actually pinpoint it. But it looks like actually aging progresses here. And that's just the introduction to say that maybe Albania is not yet there. It's not with Greece and Bulgaria in that profile, but it may be getting there faster than other economies at its level of development. And I think this is how it's relevant. The other thing to highlight is that actually living longer and even having fewer people and more land and environment, etc., to enjoy is not necessarily a tragic thing. It may be good for the quality of life, it may be good for the environment, it may be good for the planet, and ultimately it's a reflection of progress in healthcare, education, and so on. But there are important adjustments to be made. Why? Because the entire economic structure of the 20th century, the benefits that we are accustomed to and that the governor listed so nicely, pensions and healthcare and some others, are predicated on many young people and few old people. Even provision of education in rural areas becomes a lot harder when villages depopulate and suddenly you have a school for 5 kids instead of a school for 50 kids. And something that the governor also mentioned in passing, but probably also important to highlight, that even productivity and growth changes a little bit. Just when the average worker is 43, and I'm a little bit on the wrong side of that average, but not too far off, actually learning new technologies is just a little bit more difficult than it used to be 20 years ago. And people ask, well, where are the effects of artificial intelligence? Why is technology not adopted faster? Well, technology is always adopted at the speed of generational change. Young people just pick it up. My nephews, who are 3 and 5, they talk to each other through iPad. They're much better with it than I ever will be. At the time of industrial revolution in the UK coal belt, Bedford, etc., average life expectancy of a male was 19, just to put into perspective new technologies and generational change. So all of this basically affects economic development. And the question is, how do governments, how does fiscal policy, monetary policy, structural policy adopt to it in a way that is constructive that allows the society to age gracefully and keeps populism in check. Because of course, when people suddenly don't have the standards of healthcare or pensions or growth that they are accustomed to, they are not happy. And there are a lot of politicians that would exploit it. And so in this report, we go a little bit through these problems, solutions, and in the last chapter, and this is probably a slight difference of our report relative to many other reports by the United Nations, World Bank, etc. We have a long chapter looking at the political economy, what can be realistically done in terms of reforms that need to be done. So let me just skip a lot of slides and maybe sort of focus on slides that, and then open the discussion. So if we just look at what this demographic change mechanically does to economic growth, the estimate would be something that it takes 0.6 percentage points a year away from growth. So instead of growing at 4%, you grow at 3.6% on average. But this is probably a manageable effect. The effects on pension, healthcare, etc., are a lot more important. And so usually, what is the response to it? In that debate, not much has changed. There are basically three responses that can be had. Realistically, you can have immigrants, and there are still places in the world, mostly in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, that can supply a lot of migrants. There you can automate, try to basically use advances in technology to compensate for fewer people and people learning more slowly. And you can work longer or work more across a population. So if you look at what is required to offset the effect of aging through migration, they're actually just huge numbers. I think no society would be willing to digest migration on that scale. So you can have two exercises here. You can just have a look at what migration would be needed if people come and stay. And once they come and stay, you can make a generous assumption that although they come from Nigerias of the world, they would then live in terms of their profile, number of children, etc., like locals. So if they come to Hungary, they will have a Hungarian demographic profile. And these are numbers that are just off the chart. In places like Korea, you would need 5% inflow every year, but even in a place like Albania, eventually you need 1%. And it's a lot higher than any immigration seen so far. Then you can have, say, okay, if that doesn't work, well, would a Gulf model work? You invite them, you do not allow them to stay, and every 2 to 4 years, you just kick them out. And you import new young people. So you never have kind of the burden of their children, etc., on the society. So in the Gulf, it actually only works with kind of not skilled-based migration. If you're looking for highly skilled people, doctors, etc., to fill in these positions, they would need to come with children and stay. They would sort of typically, you may import someone from Cuba or the Philippines a little bit, but it doesn't work well. But for other occupations, it may work. And even those numbers are very, very high. So the only places where they currently touch the diamond here, which is historically observed migration, is the United Kingdom, which, for example, has had a lot of migration. So there you have those kind of levels. So in general, actually, although there is a lot of debate about migration and how migration helps to offset demographic pressures, etc., it's very hard to see how it's working as a long-term response. Then there is the automation bit. So with automation, this is similarly difficult in aggregate to actually see how automation would produce that much of help. But what is important with automation, and I think where it is very important, and it's on the later slides, it may help to actually, it may help people to work longer. If you could automate very physically demanding tasks a little bit more, and you don't have enough young people to do those, then maybe you can actually switch the profile of your jobs towards more, less physical, more age-friendly jobs for people who remain in the workforce. And this we have seen quite a lot happening. and this is where automation can come handy. But there are also a lot of jobs that, from cleaning to long-term care to agriculture, which are not glamorous jobs, and yet it is very difficult to see how they will be automated, and probably AI will not really automate potato production for all the promise of AI. The third area is actually most promising in terms of adjustment, and this is exactly how adjustment has been happening in places like Japan, Taiwan, etc., places that do not particularly like mass migration either, but the political economy of it is quite difficult. So here we do two mental exercises, and they actually would fill the gap. One, what happens if people work a lot longer? And two, what happens if women increase the labor force participation a lot? And actually, if you do that for a long time, through 2050 and beyond, you will have enough workers to maintain more or less the structure of the society as it is now. Workers would still be older. You have to adjust what they do, the kind of jobs they do, and the speed with which they learn, but there will be enough workers. So the left chart shows that actually in some economies, it's a very large gap in gender labor force participation that needs to be filled. In Albania, it's there, but not that large. In some economies, like the Baltics or the Slovak Republic, there is no gender gap, so this is not really an answer. The other is employment to a population ratio among all the workers 60 plus. And here, what would do the trick in terms of books is basically to make people work like they currently work at the 75th percentile of OECD, the Club of Rich Countries distribution, and that would correspond to Denmark. What currently happens in Denmark is that around 30% of these older people would be working, and actually sort of there are the selection of economies where it's currently the case among economies where we work is actually fairly eclectic, and Albania is very strongly on the right-hand side. Somehow when you look at the data, all the people actually work here, whether in agricultural services or otherwise, but there are a lot of economies, Poland, etc., where this would need to be more than doubled. And this is a difficult one because you have pension entitlements, you have health, and so on, and the effective age at which people retire is actually a lot lower than the statutory age at which people retire. And on that, maybe another sort of small observation here is that it kind of depends on the structure of jobs, but also depends on the political economy of it, to which I will come back in a second. I will probably skip a lot of fertility analysis here, but in general, it certainly remains true that there is a so-called motherhood penalty, the reduction in lifetime earning associated with having children, and that sort of is part of the choice and the bigger picture to what extent you can rebalance the female labor force participation. Let me just maybe show this chart. This is kind of the extent to which jobs over time have become less physical and more age-friendly. And that has happened across the board for economies where we work, not only in advanced economies. And this has been a very important element of the of adjustment to demographic transition. And I think part of the challenge of economic and societal policy making is to keep it going as the populations age. And when we look at what AI can and cannot do, we try to map the occupations here and look a little bit at occupations that are more exposed to AI and occupations that are less exposed to AI. And I think, one thing to notice is that there are still a lot of gray dots there, which are occupations that AI will not fundamentally touch in the foreseeable future, although foreseeable future may change fast. And among the occupations that it touches, I think there will be a lot where there will be a lot of synergies. So the technology just makes the existing more productive. There will be a lot of others where technology fundamentally displaces existing workers, and there may be accountants and auditors and salespeople and so on. And so there may be quite a bit of adjustment there in the labor market as well. So let me just spend maybe 5 minutes on the political economy of adjustment to the way population ages and why it is actually difficult to achieve that. So I think that fundamentally there are two sets of problems. One is making society to agree on what needs to be done. The other, which is also very tricky, is to actually make people healthy enough to work longer. So I'm based in London, and UK was one of the first countries that established this modern fabric of a society with quite generous healthcare, and so the National Health Service was established in 1948. And for that reason, there are reasonable health records of people going from 1948. And what you can see is that the life expectancy in the country since the Second World War has risen by almost 20 years. But the healthy life expectancy, defined as until people have some kind of documented chronic condition that makes it difficult for them to enjoy life and enjoy work, well, that hovers around 61 or so. And that has actually only increased by about half a year to a year. So all this additional kind of 19 years of living, they are not particularly healthy years of living. And this is what is putting a lot of strain on the benefit system and on the society. And that's kind of fundamentally, though, I think it's possible to find some part-time employment or employment for those people as well. Just the employment may need to be adjusted. And then on the various solutions, well, immigration has always been outright unpopular. Support for migrants may go up and down, but if in surveys you ask people whether they are okay with mass migration into their country, around 10 to 30% will say that they are okay. Advanced Europe, as it's aging, becomes migration friendlier actually quite fast. So that percentage has gone from 10% to 30%. But it's still nowhere near 50% and societal consensus. And then you ask people whether they are okay with technological change, AI, etc. And actually, one of the problems is that when societies age, they become more risk averse. People are a little bit programmed like that to take more risks in their younger years and be a little bit less receptive of change in their older years. So suddenly, actually, all the societies, they're a little bit less keen on productivity growth and growth in general, and a bit more keen on avoiding risks. And that, of course, can be seen also in rapidly aging societies like Japan. And so that may hold back the technological channel. And then when you ask people about pensions, well, actually, almost universally, with the exception of Japan, New Zealand, and a couple of Nordic countries, although people understand that pension systems are not sustainable, and they understand generally a lot of things, they still think that pensions should be more generous than they are now. And actually, if you ask on the horizontal axis the same question about unemployment benefits, people are very divided. Some people think that unemployment benefits should be generous. Other people think that they shouldn't be generous at all. And so actually on pensions, there is a very strong consensus, and it is quite difficult to break, as we have seen recently in France. And the last thing that probably I wanted to highlight is that also when societies age, and something we need to think more, a little bit more, we become quite a bit more polarized. Because the fundamental preferences of the young and the old about how to spend money are a bit different. The young would like to spend money on education and housing. The old would like to spend money on pensions and health. And actually, not only do we see it in the surveys, but we see it in the surveys that this gap is widening over time. So we do these household surveys, life and transition surveys every few years. When we compare 2010 with the latest survey, the young are ever keener on education, the old are ever keener on healthcare and pensions. This divide is growing over time. You can put it into regression analysis, and basically you will see that the political opinions become more polarized, and the area where political opinions become most polarized is actually on welfare state expansion, whether we need more and generous pensions, healthcare, etc., or less generous, and we need to adopt. The average doesn't move that much, but polarization has become strong. And when we see the rise of populism, it's not really the average, it's the 20–30% of that polarization that go with very strong, loud views. And the leaders have been aging. So the people have been aging, adults have been aging, voters have been aging, and average leaders have been aging. Actually now, average leader, but it varies, where you draw the retirement line, but the average world leader is now 60. It's a retirement job. If you look at an average person in the US Senate, I think it's 67. It's kind of a retirement job by any standard. That has been changing a lot. And so that kind of, there are a lot of biases here in favor of, in the electoral systems, in favor of old people. People are getting older, old people vote more, etc. But also to the extent that leaders express the views of the society, but also of themselves, the views of the older people get more and more expressed, and that may kind of disenfranchise a little bit the younger people, the people who are supposed to work and pay taxes and carry the burden of these aging societies. The aging has been actually not really uniform, and in autocracies, leaders have aged a lot faster than in democracies, in part because the tenure is a lot longer. The advances of healthcare, etc., allow them to stay more in the office. So, what to do about all of that? We provide some of the conclusions, and basically, I think that the most important thing is for policymakers to realize that, internalize that, and think of these reforms in 20–30-year perspective. It is very difficult to tell the people of today that tomorrow their pension or healthcare is not what it used to be yesterday, but it's probably possible to build in reforms that would only apply 20 years down the road, so that the new and the old generation is grandfathered, so the new generation, as they come in, they adopt to the realities. Even that is phenomenally difficult, because if you think about it, switching would at some point ask a given generation to pay twice, once for their grandparents and parents, as they do now, and once for themselves after they switch to the new system. And basically managing the voters and managing the political economy of that, that is the fundamental challenge. And this is the challenge that is much more easily addressed in still relatively young and dynamic economies like Albania's, and it becomes really, really difficult to do that in an economy like France, say, that is already there. So I will stop there, and basically I think that the last slide says something like time to act is now, and that is basically the message of this report. And I very much would welcome questions now, or you can find me after the presentation. Thank you very much. The difficulty, I think it's a very valid point. So I think that all we see in the world arena, the rise of more extreme parties and geopolitical international tensions, etc., they're both the causes and manifestations of the underlying unhappiness. I think to pinpoint the causes of people's underlying unhappiness is always difficult, but certainly the fact that it's increasingly difficult to sustain pension systems, healthcare, etc., may be an important underlying cause of this unhappiness that is then channeled by political actors into other areas, and people's anger basically gets harnessed. And we have a box here tracing people's emotions over time, and there is a research just showing that people are getting angry. And we have this kind of, we just measure using European social service here, where people express their views, but they also vote for certain parties in a number of elections, and we analyze the manifestos of these parties and what these parties think and say about various areas. And you can basically show that there is a lot of political polarization indeed that is happening on all fronts. It's not just narrowly defined welfare state that is close to demographics. It's certainly on general right, left wing, on migration, even on green economy and environmental protection. On a lot of areas, views are just getting more polarized. There is a question.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for the presentation. Very interesting. So you mentioned that all the policies to counter the demographic effect are obviously widely unpopular. So if the productivity gap to bridge, to address the headwind from demographics is not going to come from AI, or is not going to come from mass immigration, or is not going to come from more sustainable pension policies, then what is the solution for a middle-income country? And in the core of countries that EBRD follows, do you observe a country that is standing out, that is an outlier in their, let's say, performance in pushing the economy on a good trajectory as a combination of all these factors, technology, immigration, and pension reforms? Is there a country that is doing better than others?
That's a great question. I think fundamentally this is the menu of options, and then different societies are probably positioned differently to pick and choose from that menu. It's not really about choosing one option. You can choose a combination of those options. There are societies that are very unreceptive, say, to migration, and maybe even not that receptive to technological change, but they may be very receptive to working longer, like Japan, and even that strain is increasingly there. There are some societies, on the other hand, like the UK, that may be very unreceptive to working longer. Around 18-19% of people are on benefits, in particular older people. The emigration of older people to the Mediterranean, etc., has kind of slowed down a bit with the exit from EU, but not that much. So suddenly you actually see, and that was on that chart, an attempt at very high levels of mass migration, but it's not obvious that it's working either. And so if you go around aging advanced economies, you will find very different models of adjustment. I think it's correct that they need to be different, but I think in all those cases, with the benefit of hindsight, we may discover that working longer and having a higher female labor force participation, kind of the Scandinavian Japanese style, may be a very important part of that adjustment, because otherwise it's just difficult to see how the numbers add up. The challenge is to getting there without a populist meltdown, basically.
I actually wanted to stop by the migration issue again. Anecdotally, as you mentioned, we can see that there are some differences in terms of how societies, modern societies and high developed societies have responded to migration, right? You, for example, mentioned Japan is not very receptive. There are areas in the United States that seem to be a lot more receptive and more able to integrate them, and there are quite a lot of differences in Europe as well. Britain somewhat able to integrate migrants, France, for example, having a lot more issues with migration. Could you, maybe even for future research, could you maybe think of the types of migration that are more able to be well integrated into societies, younger, more willing to work, with a stronger professional background, cultural issues, for example, that make some groups more able to integrate in societies than others? Could there be maybe some heterogeneous effects in migration itself that make it more receptible to some societies than to others?
Absolutely. I think we will probably run another report on it at some point. It raises a lot of very complex interrelated issues. I think that there are certainly cultural issues, there are geographical issues. Can you put people in sensible clusters, and if there is space to do that? I think some economies, although migrants do go to, 2/3 of migrants in US, I think, go to 6 states, and in those states, 2/3 go to a bunch of counties. It's very concentrated, and still it's a lot of space. If you look at places like Belgium, the Netherlands, UK, etc., there is a lot less space. The pressure on housing markets, etc., is completely different. And then there is the skill composition. So I think there are actually societies the modern economies that are built on selective upskilling migration, like Singapore. That model has now stopped, more or less. The island ran out of space. But for years, the model was to just invite highly skilled people and ever increase the skill mix. Currently in the UK, with the latest wave of migration, I think more than 3/4 of migrants come on below average wage. So you ever dilute the skill level of your society through this migration. So completely different from Singapore. So the discussion of migration is very, very complex. I think it's not for today, but looking at skill and place and sort of the cultural acceptability as well. I think there is sort of research now done with very granular data on Spain, that just looking at how people vote in response to migration intake, that people may be much less influenced by migration from certain countries of origin than from other countries of origin, basically.
I have a question. There was a very interesting slide showing how different professions will be impacted by AI. I just wanted to clarify whether the top right green dots these are the professions or the jobs that will be enhanced by AI or replaced by AI, because I found that the chief executives are squarely in that corner, so a lot of the colleagues here may also be interested. But okay, that's just a clarification of the slide. But the question I have in that respect, or more food for thought, what does it mean for the education choices, profession choices of our children? Albania is a country that produces highly qualified, highly educated people, education beyond university level is highly valued. But yet we will see that some of the other professions are less at risk of being replaced by AI. And that's the case in all countries. It's much harder these days to find a good plumber in the UK than a lawyer or banker. Can the policymakers take this into account when they promote certain professions and particularly vocational education, to make those areas, those professions more attractive, more respected, more sort of for the young people today? Because in the end, the society needs all these jobs, and they cannot be replaced. And I did have that conversation with somebody who was at the forefront of AI industry development about when will I have my robot to clean the house. And the answer was probably never, because that's the kind of job that is very difficult to teach AI to do properly. So what does it mean for the skills development policies in that regard to increase perhaps participation in those professions? And EBRD supports skills sector councils here in certain industries, and that's where the sort of the vocational education policymakers meet with the private sector participants to discuss curricula because they want to create the pipeline of workers for the skills that are mostly required by the market today. And then these are usually 2 to 4 year programs, so it kind of can be quite rapid turnaround.
Thank you. It's a good question. I feel rather humble and underqualified to try to answer it. I think the reality of these choices is that you make them 20, maybe 15 years ahead of time. You kind of project into the future. I'm not sure my projections were all that good when I was making them, and I ended up where I am, writing economic policy reports. If I went back 20 years, maybe I would have made a different choice. So that makes me somewhat humble. I think there are areas that are very sort of large and also reasonably robust for these conclusions. I think if you look generally at healthcare, that the demand will be growing. I'm a little bit skeptical about automation of dentistry work or even long-term care. So that has, and actually there are countries in the region here, Bulgaria, Romania, that managed to actually scale up and export and create domestically a lot of those professionals. There are other attempts. I think in China now, 36% of all degrees are engineering degrees. It's kind of a massive push over last decades into engineering. And then other areas are, I think, a little bit sort of that the timing has to be perfect. I think in general, understanding data and data management has been good. But then there was a point in time where coders were in really great demand. If you could do good programming, it was a really good place to be. And then the last couple of years, the speed with which actually ChatGPT, Claude and the like can give you chunks of code has been astonishing. So actually, if you have a good colleague helping you with this, well, their productivity has gone up by a factor of 10. I sometimes actually just struggle to look through the output of that work. It just gets, data set gets boot coded, etc. And suddenly, so many people. I had a classmate visiting for dinner last week. Well, he's been laid off in San Francisco for a year now as a coder. After 10 years, very difficult to find a job. So suddenly, what you have coded and created 3 years ago, automated you and the likes of you out of existence. I think in more generally, data skills will be in demand for some time, but the way they're in demand may actually adjust quite a bit. So I think it's not a very good answer, but if I had a very good answer, maybe I wouldn't be here in the first place giving this presentation. Well, thank you very much. They are actually fantastic, deep questions that will make us think hard about our work going down the road. And it's a great pleasure to present in this company, great energy in the room, and I hope to be back one day.
Faleminderit.